Ahead anytime.
Okay. With us are Mark Villanti, Superintendent of Schools for the Haldane Central School District, and Joe Curto, President of the Haldane School Board. They're here to talk about the upcoming budget vote on May 15th, as well as the big picture around funding for public education. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
Mark, there's been a recurring message, I think, at your budget meetings this year that you'll squeak by in 2012-13 if the proposed budget passes, but that next year, 2013-14, will get very, very tough, with cuts likely that will have to affect education programs, extracurriculars, or both. With that focus on 2013, are you at all concerned that you may be looking too far beyond next year? How confident are you that the public understands what they'll be voting on come May 15th and what's at stake now?
It's a good question, Mike. I think we have to look ahead, and any budget that just looks at their budget from just year to year is making a big mistake, because you can get through any particular budget year. You can use up all your reserves or your fund balance. So that's not smart. I'm ringing the bell now because up until this time, even though we've made a lot of cuts and reductions, as you know, we cut $500,000 from a rollover budget to this budget. They haven't been the type of cuts that have been taking flesh off the bone. Okay, they've been maybe softer cuts, but smart cuts. After you use all your smart cuts up, then you get into cuts that are really going to be felt by students in the classroom. And it appears to us pretty clearly that if we lose another $500,000 in state aid, or translate it into 19% of our revenues, that's what we're worried about. So I think we're accurate. I think the full board feels the same way. However, we're going to do a lot of thinking and planning to avoid that. And what I'm hoping for is that I'm absolutely wrong. I'm hoping that things go our way in a number of areas and that I can be proved to be wrong, because I want to be wrong.
Okay, I'm going to stay with you for one more and then switch over to Joe. But school districts are in tough financial straits, but residents have their own serious financial challenges as well. Without going into the actual numbers, why should residents be satisfied with how this budget was drafted if you expect them to vote yes, in terms of the process?
Well, I'm really proud to be a part of Haldane, and I think that residents, whether they have children in school or not, there's a great sense of community in Haldane. Everybody is related to somebody. So public education is not only important for the kids who go to school every day and need to pursue their future, it's important to the community's future. I share with people how our growth factor is much higher than regions around us. Take a look at what's happened around us in terms of property values and how they've gone down. And I submit that not only is education an investment in your own property value, but it's an investment in education in the future. So there's all kinds of good reasons, selfish reasons, whether you have kids in school or not, why you should support public education.
Okay. Joe, school budgets are confusing. I think you'd be the last one to disagree with that. Your discussions this year have included the state-imposed tax cap, the tax levy in actual dollars, the percentage increase in the tax levy, the tax rate, budget-to-budget spending. In a budget of more than $21 million, what is the bottom line number that taxpayers want to know most about this budget? And how realistic is that figure given the times we're in your view?
Well, I think the number that everybody comes away with and wants to know and really truly cares about is the tax rate. That's the one that appears on our tax bills. That's the one that somebody's going to physically write a check for, or it comes through an escrow account, depending on how you do your mortgages. That's what I think everybody cares about. We're projecting the tax rate to be 1.95%. Over the last 5 years, we've been under 2% each, and if you average all of that out, I think it comes out to about 1.5%. The tax levy conversation and the tax cap conversation has been very confusing, complicated, and I think to some extent somewhat intentional. When it came out that there was a tax cap, everybody heard 2% tax cap, and I think 9 out of 10 people on the street would probably say tax cap means tax rate, 2%, okay, I can live with that. The cost of living is 3.2%, but I can live with that. It's not a tax rate cap, it's a tax levy cap. Now the tax levy conversation and formula is very complicated. Our tax levy cap is 3.16%. So the average person may say 2% in my head, but they're saying 3.16. Where's all this coming from?
Right.
It's confusing.
That was your cap. What did you actually come in at?
We came in
terms
at
of that?
2.44.
So you're under what the state had imposed.
Right, we're underneath the cap. We went underneath the cap for a reason, because we felt, given economic times and given, the budget process, we needed to be below the cap. And we felt that the tax rate issue was the more important issue, because that's what everybody pays. And being under 2% was a goal.
Okay. Mark, one of our readers commented online about the proposed budget, actually as did one of your trustees at one of the meetings, that $70,000 for cleaning supplies may be a line item that could be trimmed in a tough budget year. Can residents be assured that you've trimmed as much as you can throughout the budget?
Well, we've cut our cleaning supplies by about 10%, and remember that schools are required by law now to go green, and that is actually more costly than some of the older supplies. So that may not make sense to you as a homeowner when you think of 70,000, but when you look at almost 1,000 kids going to school a day, the last thing you want to do is to cut back on personal hygiene. Remember, we've had a scare, it was what, about a year and a half ago, 18 months ago, we were talking about Mercer, where we were needing to make sure that we were cleaning and re-cleaning and treating areas in order to, so there's all kinds of public health issues in terms of cleanliness. So, that is a budget item. Maybe we'll be a little bit below, maybe we'll be a little bit above, but we don't put the numbers down if we don't think that they're the right number.
Joe, you mentioned the tax increase being around less than 2% for the last several years. How does this year's budget increase or tax increase compare to the consumer price index? How does that sit?
The CPI, which we actually are required to report on our school report card, was 3.2%. So we're coming in at what we believe to be 1.95%. And then just also playing off of Mark's answer to your question, philosophically, what the board has been doing in these last 5 years of the tax rate increase being under 2% is at the end of the year when we balance out our books and we come up with, let's say, possibly an overage, we're pouring that money back into tax rate reduction. So what we're doing is budgeting properly, because the budget is just an estimate of expenses. If in fact we budgeted $1 for pencils and we only spent 95 cents on pencils, you can be pretty much assured that the extra 5 cents is going back, for the most part, into a tax rate reduction when we do set our tax rate, which is in August.
Mark, I know it's a two-step process, but what happens on May 15th if it's a no vote? First step.
If it's a no vote, the board will deliberate on what its next step is. If they decide to put the budget up for a second time, there's a statewide date in June for revotes. If the board indicates that we should go to contingency, that's another choice they have. If they go to contingency, we need to cut $415,000 from the budget, and I need to recommend to the board those items that need to be cut, and they need to approve it. The board could also say, we'll have a second vote, but you got to trim it a little bit here or there, which is typically, in the one instance I've ever had a defeated budget, which is what we did. We put a revised budget up to the public.
Right, and then if the second vote receives a no vote, then you are compelled to go to a contingency budget.
Correct, which is different than in the past years,
right,
where you might go up 1% in your budget. In this case, you go 0% on the tax levy. And superintendents, I can tell you, around the state are scared to death, because if we had to cut $415,000 this year from our budget, we're looking at frankly, staffing, teachers, athletics, things that most people think are requirements from education at Haldane.
right. If either of you had to or could redo this budget cycle over again, would you do anything different?
I wouldn't. I think that we originally proposed a budget to the board that was at the tax levy cap. And I think the board made a good decision, as I remarked last night, when they said, Dr. Villanti, try to get this down to 2%, tell us what you have to do to get it to 2%. That's what we've done, because we think the public doesn't understand this whole tax cap thing, and all they understand is 2%. So we did go to under 2%. I don't think we've cut anything that is going to drastically negatively impact education. I think it's a good budget. We've actually added some things that improve the instructional program. But as I said before, next year worries us because every district across New York State, almost every district, is using fund balance and reserves to fill the gap, the cuts that in loss of state aid. You can only get away with that for so long.
Right. This next one's a bit of a can of worms for sure, so I'll limit you both to two worms. But you've both been critical of cuts in state aid in education to the tune of $500,000 per year at Haldane, and that's anticipated to go into the future. But the state is in its own financial quagmire and needs to cut spending. Should schools not bear part of that burden as well, along with highways, state parks, and other state programs? What do you see as the real problem here?
Is this open to both of us?
Yeah.
Yeah, you can start, I'll finish.
I'm a product of public education. I'm the first person in my family to graduate high school and go to college. I was a blue-collar kid. A lot of people can't afford private school. We know from just looking at economic studies, the Wall Street Journal just yesterday, front page article linking the quality, the economic vitality of a country with the quality of public education. So for me, public education should be a priority. And yes, I do think there should be shared sacrifice. I don't think public education should be exempt. But it seemed rather drastic. If I told my suppliers, I'm sorry, this year I can only pay 79% of what I owe you, that wouldn't be a way to do business. And essentially that's what the state of New York is saying. Your aid on one hand is flat, on another hand we're reducing you by almost 20%. It's an easy way for the state to balance its budget, but where does that go? It goes to the local taxpayers. And I think they need to do better. I think that public education should be a priority in New York State. I think it's important for the future economic recovery of our country. I think it's a terrible mistake economically to be laying off all these public service workers. I don't think that's a wise thing. Listen to people who are economists talk about that. I think that's just the last thing we need right now, and that's also adding a drag to the recovery of our economy. So yes, we should do our fair share, but and I'm not the governor, and I can't look at the whole picture. But I think right now, 20% of our revenues is too much.
And I don't think a majority of the so-called school supporters subscribe to the theory that you just have to keep spending money. So in other words, we need an increase, we need an increase, we need an increase because that's what we're used to and that's what we need. I think what you need is a combination of some things. One, yes, we all need to share in this sacrifice. But I think the state needs to take a little bit of a different look at education. Education, as Mark said, is an investment. And I believe it's probably one of the best investments you can actually make in a person. But you also got to change the system a little bit. The system has laws that have been on the books for 30, 40 years that at the time of inception were probably great, but we're in a different world now. So you can't play by the same rules today that 30 years ago were applicable because that just doesn't work. So maybe it's not all about just giving us everything that we had. Change the rules of engagement so that we can actually be a little more creative and do a little bit more. I'm a product of the business community. I've said many times to you that my dad was a small business guy and he taught us, you work hard, you do what you gotta do. Well, you can't do that in this system because the system doesn't allow it by law. Change it so that we can actually do that. And schools are pretty creative. Haldane's done a pretty good job of playing by the rules. The rules need to change a little bit.
Mike, can I add one thing? Remember, our budget has increased less than 1.5%. And 4 items account for 90% of that increase that we have no control over. The increase in healthcare, the increase in teacher pensions, the increase in support CSEA, support ERS pensions, and some special ed costs that we have to do by law. So we're hardly spenders. We've really tried to be as conservative as we possibly can. But when you tell us you can spend less and you're going to get 20% less aid, where's that difference going to come from?
Well, some people believe, maybe a lot of people believe, that consolidation is one way to save tax dollars. So why not consolidation locally and in Putnam County And do you think it can ever happen if not actually mandated by the state?
I mean, I think for it to happen, it probably would need to be mandated. Is it a good idea? Depends on who you talk to and from what angle you take it at. I think it's a little more complicated than just saying big is better than small. A common conversation that you hear around Philipstown is Garrison and Haldane should consolidate. Conceptually it makes perfect sense. Our kids play soccer together, why can't we go to school together? When you actually look at it a little differently, I think there's a lot more factors involved in there. I mean, it's pretty stated that Garrison's taxes would increase, Haldane's would decrease. To the Garrison guy, why would he accept an increase and why would this guy? So, that's just common rationale. I think what you need to do in these consolidations is really seriously do a